The story begins in the desert. A group of mercenaries has been hired to search for the demon sword Zolchuan. Legend has it that whoever possesses it will gain immense power. Seiya, Ikiju, and Miura have come on behalf of the Shashidai organization to retrieve Zolchuan. This sword stands above all other legendary weapons, for it was forged from the blood of 1,000 demons. Ikijo warns Miura to be careful, because if he allows the sword to enchant him, a demon will take over his body. Ikijo does not want Miura to become the 1,001st demon. The legend of Zolchuan dates back to the Roman era, making it nearly 2,000 years old. In those times, a barbarian army attacked a small village on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. The villagers had no defenses and were swiftly slaughtered by the invaders. The village priests desperately begged the gods for salvation, but the heavens turned a deaf ear, and so they turned to the demons instead. They sacrificed the village sheep and prayed before the forces of darkness. The demon answered their prayers and sent forth a lone knight. The weapon this knight wielded was none other than Zolchuan. When the knight drew the sword from its sheath, they say it roared like a wild beast. The battle was over in an instant. The demonic aura emanating from Zolchuan struck down the barbarian horde. The villagers thanked the knight, but they had forgotten one thing. They had not prayed to the gods, but to a demon. That knight had not come to save their village, but to annihilate all living things. Though the legend filled them with a measure of dread, finding Zolchuan was this group's job, so they pressed on. Before long, they unearthed a burial chamber resembling a mausoleum. Light seeped through the cracks in the wall ahead. When they broke through, they discovered what lay inside: Zolchuan. At that very moment, Seiya and Miura arrived by aircraft with a fully armed squad. The men inside fired warning shots, demanding to know who they were. Miura showed no fear and introduced themselves as agents of the Shashidai, the organization responsible for managing legendary weapons. He ordered the other group to hand over Zolchuan, but they refused to comply and immediately resorted to force. While his men fought, the leader slipped away alone to seize the sword. But the moment he touched it, the sword's demonic energy consumed him entirely, and he lost all control. The situation outside had been handled, and an armed team rushed inside to find Zolchuan, but every last one of them was killed by the sword. Ikijo had no choice but to use drastic measures to reclaim it. Miura took the sword, sealed it inside a containment case, and the mission was complete. They returned to the organization's headquarters, a place that housed a vast collection of legendary swords. In the light reflected off the blade, he could almost see the faces of the sword's victims, and that was what made it so breathtakingly beautiful. With the mission accomplished, Ikijo had to return to his hibernation pod, and this sleep would likely be a long one. After Seiya departed, Miura stood staring at Zolchuan, a strange smile creeping across his face. That night, Shashidai agents continued their work collecting legendary weapons from others. One such weapon suddenly burst into flames, engulfing an entire ship at sea. Meanwhile, Miura began hearing a voice calling to him inside his head. Believing it to be Zolchuan, he returned to the storage chamber and removed the sword from its sealed case. Ikijo's earlier fears had become reality. By the time the others arrived, Miura had already fallen under the sword's control and was slaughtering everyone in sight. Elsewhere, Takashi returned home to his pregnant wife, Wakaba. In just one more month, they would become parents, since they had decided to keep the baby's gender a surprise until birth. Takashi had bought gifts for both a boy and a girl. In another place, the sword Shiryu had grown bloodthirsty once again. The monks there performed the Hama ritual to purge Shiryu's killing intent. But tragically, the blood sacrifice was overtaken by the sword's dark energy. Another bloody massacre unfolded. Even so, Shiryu's thirst for blood remained unsatisfied. It drove its host into the city to continue the killing. Tragedy struck when Takashi and Wakaba became victims by cruel chance. Takashi was killed. Wakaba survived, but having witnessed everything with her own eyes, she was consumed by rage. She glared at the swordsman with eyes burning with hatred. The swordsman suddenly snapped back to consciousness, and, seeing how many people he had killed, was overcome with terror and panic. The sword Shiryu slipped from his grasp and fell to the ground. Wakaba picked it up and ended his life. When the police arrived at the scene of the massacre, Wakaba fled in fear into a dark corner. Soon after, Shiryu took control of her as well, driving her to seek more blood. But just as she was about to strike a mother holding her small child, she regained her senses and fled. She wanted to release the sword from her hand, but she could not. Miura was surrounded on a bridge. Shashidai called on him to abandon Zolchuan and surrender, but he had already transformed into a Busoma and obliterated their tanks without hesitation. When Shashidai ordered an attack on Zolchuan, Flamberge arrived and finished off the remaining 2 tanks along with the surviving soldiers. The 2 swords called out to each other ceaselessly. They existed only to fight and to seek ever stronger foes. Both transformed and launched into battle against one another. Zolchuan claimed victory and departed in triumph. Wakaba, unwilling to become a killer, gave birth to her child and then chose to take her own life. A man discovered the baby clinging tightly to the sword, as though grasping for life itself. That child was Gai Ogata. Time passed, and Gai was raised by Ammon alongside Sayaka, working in the old man's forge. Today, Sayaka went to school as usual, But throughout her classes, she could not concentrate. Her mind was filled with nothing but thoughts of Guy. When break time came, her friends invited her out for lunch. They also asked her to join them at a new karaoke place that had just opened near the train station after school, but she shyly declined. Earlier, Sayaka had received a confession from Ishii, but she turned him down, saying she simply did not have time for a relationship. Ishii was the captain of the soccer team, handsome, top of his class, the dream boy of every girl in school, and the fact that Sayaka had rejected him drove her friends nearly insane. They thought she was out of her mind. All Sayaka could do was laugh and apologize. On the bus ride home, she seemed to carry some unspoken feeling she could not yet put into words. The moment she stepped off the bus, she ran into Tatsumi, who was out running errands for Sayaka's father, his master. On the way back, they encountered Guy. Sayaka wanted to talk to him, but he quickly headed off to chop charcoal. Sayaka left Tatsumi behind and hurried after Guy. She thanked him for rescuing her, since she had no idea what to talk about with Tatsumi. She tried to invite Guy to the karaoke place her friends had mentioned, but he refused, citing work. Sayaka grew irritated because Guy was always consumed by work and never went anywhere. She even told him that if he kept living like this, he would never forge a good sword. This struck a nerve. Guy was furious, but he kept it hidden and simply told Sayaka to go away. But stubborn Sayaka snatched the knife from Guy's hand, insisting he come play with her. In his anger, Guy accidentally hurt Sayaka. When Tatsumi saw this, he flew into a rage and slammed Guy to the ground. Although Sayaka tried to explain, Tatsumi placed all the blame squarely on Guy. Guy did not protest. He simply bowed and apologized. At that moment, Ammon stepped outside. Rather than passing judgment on the matter, he announced that the next day they would perform the calming ritual for Shiryu. He told Sayaka to cleanse her body in preparation for her role as Shrine Maiden. Afterward, he took Guy to his mother's grave, the very place where he had been born. But Guy refused to kneel before his mother's resting place. Ammon had buried Wakaba here because this spot overlooked the entire area where Guy lived, so that she could always watch over him. Ammon had raised Guy for over a decade and taught him everything he needed to know. Now he wanted to hear about the boy's plans for the future. Guy said he wanted to stay with Ammon and devote his future to the craft of the forge. Ammon had already expected this answer, so he simply reminded the boy to work harder. That evening, Guy went alone to the room where Shiryu was kept. In his heart, he regarded this sword as his only mother. Tatsumi happened to witness this. Inside a lavish building, an auction of rare treasures was underway. Mickey was present at the auction to carry out a mission assigned by the organization, though he seemed more interested in enjoying the food and drinks. Marcus was also there. The two chatted amicably. During their conversation, Mickey carelessly raised his wine glass, and the auctioneer mistook it for a bid, awarding him a Sukhothai Buddha statue for $130,000. Since this was not part of the plan, the organization would not cover the cost, and he would have to pay out of his own pocket. When the auction concluded, all guests were escorted to another room for a preview of items in the next session. Among those items was the sword Azoth. Mickey's true mission here was to verify whether this sword was authentic. Mickey sensed the demon trapped inside the blade laughing at him. Marcus also desired the sword, as it had once belonged to the legendary alchemist Paracelsus. Its story began in the 16th century, when Paracelsus formed a pact with a demon to perfect his art of alchemy. In exchange, he sold his soul to the devil. With the demon's forbidden knowledge, he perfected the Philosopher's Stone, the origin of all matter. Then he broke the pact. The demon, enraged beyond measure, sought every means to destroy Paracelsus, but it was Paracelsus who emerged victorious. He embedded the Philosopher's Stone into a sword and sealed the demon within it, and that sword became known as Azoth. Marcus confirmed this one was genuine, for he too had heard the demon's laughter. Tatsumi reported to Ammon that he had seen Guy touching Shiryu, but Ammon dismissed it, as it posed no harm to Guy. Ammon then told Tatsumi the story of how Guy had been found. At the time, the infant's hands had been wrapped tightly around Shiryu, as if the sword itself were protecting him. Ammon also believed that Guy was the one Shiryu had been searching for. That was precisely why they needed Guy's blood to calm the blade. Guy's eyes never looked at people. They were always fixed on swords. This meant he walked alongside death at every moment. Guy had reached a level of existence that few could ever attain. The next morning, they began the calming ritual for Shiryu. Everyone present was required to cover their eyes. Guy dripped his blood onto Shiryu to soothe it. At this crucial moment, Tatsumi, unable to accept that Guy would be the chosen one, removed his blindfold to see what was happening. The demon within the sword seized control of Sayaka and drove her to kill Tatsumi. But Guy pushed him out of the way just in time. In doing so, however, his arm was severed. Sayaka collapsed unconscious immediately after. Although Guy was rushed to the hospital, he could still feel the pain from his lost arm, a phantom agony beyond any cure. Sayaka had no memory of what had happened during the ritual. All she could do was hold Guy to comfort him. But Guy suddenly pushed her away and ran to Wakaba's grave, clawing at the earth and screaming that this was the woman who had abandoned him. Afterward, Ammon decided to use Shiryu to fashion a new arm for Guy, and it seemed that was exactly what Shiryu desired as well. At the next auction, Marcus bid $500,000 for the sword Azoth. After consulting with the organization, Mickey raised the bid to a full $1 million. Marcus refused to back down and continued to raise the price. They went back and forth until the bid reached $1,500,000, at which point Marcus finally conceded. Having completed his mission, Mickey quickly headed back to headquarters, but Marcus intercepted him on the way. Marcus demanded that Mickey sell the sword to him, threatening to send people after him if he refused. Naturally, Mickey would not compromise, so Marcus's men attacked. Mickey dispatched them swiftly, but he still could not leave, for he had become the target of Zolchuan. His superiors ordered him to run, but Mickey drew the Fulgon and stood ready to fight. At that very moment, Guy jolted awake with his new arm. Mickey showed no fear when confronting Zolchuan. However, when he found himself at a disadvantage, he was forced to unleash the power of the Thunder Sword Fulgon to escape. A bolt of lightning struck down from the sky, blinding everyone in sight. Though he survived, Mickey discovered that he had lost the sword Azoth. Meanwhile, Guy silently gazed at his new hand beneath the moonlight. Shiryu never stopped calling on him to kill, but he was not swayed by it in the slightest. He could not understand why Ammon had grafted Shiryu onto his body. Ammon explained that Shiryu was Guy's guardian sword, and now it would serve as his right arm and continue to protect him. He told Guy that if he felt any guilt, he must forge a sword even greater than Shiryu. Guy resolved to fulfill Ammon's words, even if it cost him his life. Sayaka was overjoyed to see Guy recovering, but Guy thought Ammon was a fool for destroying Shiryu for his sake. He did not believe he deserved such a sacrifice. When Sayaka saw Shiryu's scabbard, she assumed her father wanted Guy to forge a new sword to fit it. But Guy split the scabbard in two and cast it into the fire, because Shiryu was one of a kind and could never be remade. Even after Guy had saved his life, Tatsumi felt no gratitude. Instead, his jealousy only deepened, for Guy now possessed Shiryu. Ammon understood how he felt, but to Ammon, a sword was merely a tool, and a human life would always matter more. Because Shiryu possessed its own will, it and Guy were bound together by a mysterious fate. Ammon wanted to see how Guy would live now that Shiryu had become a part of him. He had been a swordsmith for 40 years, yet he had never forged a blade that truly satisfied him. But if Guy could live as that sword, then perhaps the boy himself would become his masterpiece. In his sprawling mansion, Marcus was asleep when the demon within the sword Azoth appeared before him. Marcus jolted awake. He took hold of the sword and recalled the battle between Zolchuan and Fulgon. This only strengthened his belief that the teachings of ancient sorcery were no fabrication. Powers beyond human imagination still existed in this world. Driven by the desire for revenge, Marcus resolved to seize that power with his own hands. While he was lost in thought, his sister walked in and pulled him downstairs to have dinner with the family. His parents and sister seemed to love and care for him deeply, but he took no joy in it whatsoever. These people were nothing more than actors he had hired to play a part, and he had grown utterly sick of this counterfeit family. He told them to leave. Marcus sat alone before the lavish dinner table, tears streaming down his face. That night, Marcus performed a ritual of prayer with Azoth, but the sword gave him no answer. The Shashadai organization was investigating everything they could find about Marcus. He had once studied at the Imperial University, but during a holiday 2 years prior, he was involved in a traffic accident that killed both his parents and his sister. Marcus himself was left paralyzed from the waist down with no hope of recovery. Then, without warning, Erica appeared at Marcus's door. He had tried to contact her many times before, but she had never responded. Marcus knew that Erica had returned to marry Tanabe, his closest friend. Though he put on a cheerful front and offered his blessings, inside he felt nothing but anguish. They had once shared such joyful times together. Marcus wanted to make those traitors pay. Azoth sensed the flames of hatred burning within Marcus and appeared to grant his wish. The next day, when Sayaka returned from school, Tatsumi was already waiting to meet her. In truth, he had been scheming to take Sayaka for himself, resentful that their master favored Guy. Fortunately, Guy arrived just in time to stop him. Tatsumi used Guy as an excuse for his wrongdoing and charged at him, ready to fight. But Guy easily sent him flying with the power of Shiryu. Shiryu relentlessly urged Guy to kill Tatsumi. It was Sayaka's voice that pulled Guy back to his senses. Afterward, Shiryu's voice continued to echo in Guy's mind, driving him to the brink of madness until he nearly destroyed the arm himself. When Sayaka rushed over to stop him, Guy realized the voice had gone silent. The wedding of Tashio and Erika was held in secret. Just as they were about to exchange rings, Marcus arrived. He strode into the ceremony hall and slowly rose to his feet, stunning everyone present. At the Ogata household, Kiyomi had finished sharpening the legendary spear Tondokiri and brought it to return to Ammon. But Ammon was not home, so she could only leave the spear with his disciples. Tatsumi lurked in a corner and overheard their entire conversation. Back at the ceremony, Marcus's eyes burned with nothing but hatred. He lunged toward Tashio and Erika swift as a gust of wind. Miki appeared and blocked his strike, giving the couple a chance to flee. But Marcus caught up to them in an instant. In that moment at the threshold of death, Erika called out Marcus's name, and it brought him back. He collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Mickey came to his side, offered comfort, and invited Marcus to join the organization. Even on the way back with Mickey, Marcus could not stop crying. He could not believe he had tried to kill Erica, the person he loved most in the world. But in truth, Marcus had been under Azoth's control, and once he regained consciousness, he remembered nothing. Tatsumi secretly unwrapped the spear Tombakiri to examine it and was immediately possessed by it. Mickey brought Marcus to the Shashidai organization, a sanctuary for people like them. There, they would enter a deep slumber. While Guy was chopping wood, Tatsumi ambushed him without warning. Tatsumi had already become a Bisoma, beyond any salvation. Sayaka saw what Tatsumi had become and fainted on the spot. Even as a Bisoma, Tatsumi could not let go of his obsession with surpassing Guy. Mickey told Marcus that even while they remained in a stable condition, it was only a matter of time before they too became Bisoma. The fate of those who had fused with a weapon was already sealed. All that remained was a question of when. Marcus begged Mickey to be his friend. What he did not expect was that Mickey had already considered him one. Despite Tatsumi's relentless assault, Guy refused to use Shiryu to fight back. Enduring tremendous pain throughout his body, Guy Ogata struggled against the temptation of Shiryu, but his will was being worn down. A scream erupted from him like a demon's howl, and his right arm twisted and morphed into a blade. His control shattered completely. Guy hurled himself at Tatsumi with a fury that was no longer human. By the time Ammon sensed the killing intent and arrived, he found only Sayaka lying motionless on the ground. Guy and Tatsumi had fought their way deep into the forest. Guy drove his blade through Tatsumi's side, forcing him to retreat, but the chase did not end there. Meanwhile, Marcus was introduced by Kyoka to the Shoshidai leadership, who would now place him under their protection. At the same time, Mickey was taken for an examination. Mickey's transformation had increased by 2%, but no anomalies were detected. The results surprised everyone. They discovered that the weapon within a host's body gradually lost its physical structure, yet could still be captured in imaging, like a ghost. The Shoshidai leaders explained to Marcus that they were researching the method by which weapons invaded and controlled humans. If they succeeded, they could revert Marcus from a chrysalis back to a normal person and eliminate the risk of him becoming a Bisoma. They asked Marcus about what had happened while Azoth possessed him, but his memories were hazy at best. By the time he realized what was happening, the sword was already in his hands. It had merged with his body as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The leaders believed that chrysalis hosts held new potential for the future of humanity. Marcus had no choice but to join the organization, for only they could save him, and in turn, he would help save mankind. In another room, Mina continued running tests on Mickey. They both looked forward to the day Shoshidai's research would be complete so Mickey could return to being a normal person. Mickey feared that while he slept, Mina would find another man, because sleeping inside the pod felt like sinking into eternal darkness. He longed to live like ordinary people, to go to the movies with Mina, share meals, take walks, and be free to go on dates. While they were talking, Kyoka called and asked Mickey to come to the weapons vault because Marcus was there alone and she was uneasy about it. Mickey and Mina shared a passionate kiss before he left. The moon that night was red as blood. Guy and Tatsumi had hunted each other all the way into the city, leaving many dead in their wake. In the end, Guy drove his blade clean through Tatsumi's body. At that same moment, Shoshidai detected the existence of both Guy and Tatsumi. Back at headquarters, Marcus threw himself into Mickey's arms the moment he saw him, crying loudly. Kyoka had just opened the weapons vault for Marcus to tour when she received orders from High Command. So she left Marcus in Mickey's care and hurried off. A scout who had discovered Guy launched an attack. In that split second, Tatsumi suddenly regained consciousness, kicked Guy away, and fled. In a fit of rage, Guy slashed the helicopter out of the sky, sending it up in flames. Kyoka could not determine whether Guy was a chrysalis or a Bisoma. After regaining his senses, Guy dragged his exhausted body back home. Shiryu went berserk and seized Guy by the throat. He was trying to drag his soul into the darkness. Ammon fought to hold it back, sustaining injuries himself in order to save Guy. After a struggle, Shiryu finally relented. On his end, Mickey was giving Marcus a tour while explaining the nature of cursed weapon. They were armaments that carried their own lives and wills. They devoured the fury of everyone they killed. But no one understood why they could manipulate humans. One of Shoshidai's duties was to place chrysalis hosts into slumber to prevent them from mutating. But just as a chrysalis inevitably becomes a butterfly, one day they too would become Bisoma. When that happened, they would lose all will, becoming extensions of the weapon itself, with nothing left but the desire to kill. Another massacre had taken place. Zul'Juan had infiltrated a prison and slaughtered every inmate, feeding on their hatred and bloodlust as though it were a grand feast. Afterward, Mickey and Marcus were put into hibernation, and Akijo was awakened once more. Tatsumi hid in the forest, gravely wounded. In his frenzy, he attacked animals and passers-by alike to satisfy Tombakiri's thirst for blood. Sayaka searched everywhere for Guy and found him locked inside a cabinet. She tried to talk to him, but he said nothing and behaved in the strangest way. After observing Guy's actions, Ammon realized the boy had regressed into a child. Perhaps Guy feared the power of Shiryu now that it had fully merged with him. He was trying to escape himself by retreating into childhood. Ikijo emerged from his hibernation pod after 16 years and 24 days. Knowing that this time he would face a mission of great importance, Ikijo's Omakor was the chakram, the weapon of Vishnu, the supreme deity since the dawn of creation. Ikijo was a child of the gods, standing above all others. The iron gates of the headquarters swung open. Ikijo climbed into a supercar and sped off into the distance. This was Kyoka's first time working with Ikijo, though she had heard a great deal about the chakram and his fighting style. The ancient epics of India told of a kingdom that had incurred the wrath of the gods. Bearing a ring of light, the divine messenger descended to punish the king and his people. That light incinerated everything in its path. Word spread that the luminous ring wielded by the messenger was the chakram. He was left behind by the gods and worshipped by mortals as a sacred weapon before being sealed away. The one who now wielded the chakram was the strongest chrysalis of Shashidai, Ikijo. That evening, Sayaka prepared Guy's favorite dish only to discover he was not in his room. She found him in the forest, sitting before a statue and smiling. Then the rain began to fall, and he cried like a small child. Remembering her father's words, Sayaka sat down beside him and gently coaxed him to come home. Amon went to deliver a sword to old Kaijitsu, who showered him with praise for his craftsmanship. But Amon still seemed dissatisfied, for his lifelong ideal was to forge a blade capable of cutting through the sword within one's consciousness. Over tea, they discussed Shiryu. Amon believed that only Shiryu could cut through the blade lodged inside Guy's mind. By the tradition of swordsmiths, when forging a sword, they would create two and select the superior one. Amon reasoned that if two truly existed, then Shiryu must have been the weaker of the pair, for it bore no inscription. That meant the stronger version might still be out there somewhere. At the Fujishu polishing workshop, Haida and Kiyomi were polishing swords together. They both agreed that the most beautiful part of a Japanese sword was the blade itself. In the West, many swords and weapons had elaborately decorated hilts, but the beauty of a blade existed solely to kill. The katana was the only weapon in the world that elevated the killing edge into an art form. The sharper it became, the more beautiful it grew. The mightiest weapon bearing the most exquisite beauty was the Japanese sword, and their craft was to polish that beauty to its absolute limit. Kiyomi was so obsessed with Japanese swords that she could identify where the iron sand came from, and how the blade was forged simply by running her tongue across it. She even begged Haida to slash her with a freshly polished sword just to feel it. Sayaka had altered one of Amon's yukatas for Guy to wear to the festival. Sayaka herself changed into a yukata patterned with butterflies, unaware that someone was secretly watching her. Sayaka took Guy along to the festival. The venue was adorned with dazzling decorations. Crowds bustled through, with games and food stalls everywhere. Everything there felt entirely new to Guy. Sayaka led him through one attraction after another, winning a mountain of prizes along the way. That evening, Kiyomi received a new client. They said they were in a hurry and left behind a generous sum of money. When Kiyomi opened the case, she discovered the sword inside was Shiryu. She set to polishing it under immense tension. Despite her best efforts, Kiyomi could not escape Shiryu's control. She swung the blade at Haida. Terrified, he stumbled backward again and again until the sword struck the family altar, sending the ancestral portraits crashing to the floor, which jolted Kiyomi back to her senses. She immediately ordered Haida out of the room and continued her work. The sword kept demanding she feed it more blood. Left with no other choice, Kiyomi offered her own blood to appease it. Zolchuan, guided by the fading remnants of Miura's memories, found its way to a theater and played the piano piece that Miura had loved. Meanwhile, the fire sword had also arrived. They were kindred spirits, both cursed swords born in the age of myth. The fire sword had lost to Zolchuan once before and was determined to reclaim its honor in a new battle. Grims and Arties stood atop a tall building overhead, observing the fight. Grims had been called the god of death since the dawn of mankind. He believed the age of Busoma was drawing near and that humanity would be cast into hell. Once again, the fire sword fell to Zolchuan. Sayaka brought Guy to a shrine to pray, hoping the gods would watch over him. On the way back, Tatsumi blocked their path. By now, he was completely under the weapon's control, driven by a single desire to kill Sayaka. Shiryu deflected Tatsumi's attack to protect Guy, but because Guy had regressed into the mind of a child with no will to fight, he was easily thrown aside. Sayaka rushed to Guy's side in panic, but the next instant Tombakiri hoisted her into the air. The spear crested its point against Sayaka's throat. She cried out in terror, begging for her life. Ikijo arrived just in time and severed Tatsumi's arm with the chakram, saving Sayaka. Though Tatsumi had once been human, he was now nothing more than a pitiful monster enslaved by his weapon. Tombakiri commanded Tatsumi to pick up the spear with his remaining arm and charge at Ikijo. On Kiyomi's end, the mysterious client returned for the sword the moment it was finished. Kiyomi was utterly drained, her arms covered in wounds from drawing her own blood for the blade. Haida asked the client about the sword's origins, but the man simply smiled and carried the sword away. Tatsumi slashed downward again and again, but not a single blow could touch Ikijo. He had been completely consumed by Tombakiri and was beyond any hope of salvation. The only thing Ikijo could do now was to grant him a swift end. Ikijo bound Tatsumi tight with the chakram. On Guy's hand, Shiryu trembled involuntarily. In an instant, Tatsumi and Tombakiri dissolved into water. As Ikijo was about to leave, he suddenly realized that the person he had been searching for was Guy. Ikijo turned back and fixed his blazing red eyes on the boy. Without a word, Ikijo walked up to Guy and punched him hard. Guy burst into tears and wailed that he was going to tell his mother. Sayaka rushed forward and stood between them to shield Guy. Ikijo paid her no mind, brushing her aside. He grabbed Guy by the collar and demanded that he reveal his true self. Old Kaijitsu appeared out of nowhere. One glance was all it took for him to recognize Ikijo as a member of the Shashidai. They sat down to talk. Ikijo continued to observe Guy's condition. If Guy could still control himself, Ikijo would bring him to Shashidai. But if Guy had become a Busoma, Ikijo would have no choice but to kill him. Kaijitsu knew not only of Shashidai but also of the Gabai organization. Ikijo dismissed them as children playing games, nothing but obstacles in the way. Soin, a member of Gabai, did not take kindly to those words. Using demons to slay demons was heresy. The righteous path was for humans to destroy Busoma by their own hands, and he too was here to hunt one down. But Ikijo regarded everything Gabai did as nothing more than ants trying to topple a chariot. Soin wanted to eliminate Ikijo immediately, knowing he would inevitably become a Busoma himself. Kaijitsu had no intention of stopping their fight. A clash between Gabai and Shashidai was exceedingly rare, and the old man was eager to watch. Ikijo was unaware that Gabai possessed the secret art of the Kenpo unconscious school. They emptied their minds and channeled spiritual energy into their fists. Soin launched himself forward and drove his fist into Ikijo. Ikijo was genuinely surprised by Soin's power. He had not expected to need the chakram against a mere human. In the heat of the moment, Guy noticed something emerging from the ground, lunging toward Soin. He kicked a rock at it, forcing it to retreat. Soin detected demonic energy swirling around Guy and moved to deal with him first. But the Busoma hiding within Soin's own shadow surfaced and killed him. It then thrust its razor-sharp spear toward Guy, wounding him. The scent of blood roused Shiryu instantly. It seized control of Guy, who drove the blade clean through the enemy's skull. Ikijo held back, wanting to see Guy's true power. Guy swung again and cleaved the monster in two. But it did not die. It unleashed one final strike before seizing its chance to flee. Ikijo wanted to verify for himself whether Guy had already become a Busoma. He struck Guy down with the chakram. The blow also snapped Guy back to consciousness. Ikijo was about to press his attack, but Kaijitsu clung to him. Sayaka seized the opportunity to help Guy escape. Ikijo was furious enough to kill Kaijitsu, but held back, knowing he still needed the old man to lead him to Guy. Kaijitsu brought Ikijo to meet Ammon so he could learn about Guy and Shiryu. Guy and Sayaka had taken refuge at a cave deep in the forest, a place they had often visited as children. Guy's wounds healed rapidly. Shiryu had also sustained injuries while protecting him. The cave stirred memories of how Guy had always run away from home as a child, only to come back every time because he had nowhere else to go. What Guy was running from was the darkness. No matter how far he fled, it always clung to him and tried to destroy him. No matter how hard he struggled, he could never escape it, so he decided to change the way he thought. Guy wanted to forge a sword that could sever the world itself and the darkness that forever haunted him. This frightened Sayaka. She believed that even if Guy could not escape the darkness, there was still light in this world. But Guy did not see it that way. His world and Sayaka's were different, so their perspectives could never align. Though he was grateful to Ammon for raising him, he still did not see the old man as his father, nor did he consider this place a true family. These words left Sayaka deeply saddened. Among swordsmiths, a legend had been passed down that the sword Shiryu was not made by human hands, but was forged by a dragon. During the middle of the Muromachi period, not far from the capital, there stood a shrine that housed a dragon's horn. One of the priests hatched a wicked scheme. Together with a woman, he stole the box that contained the dragon's horn. When they opened it, a dragon appeared. A brilliant beam of light plunged into the woman's mouth. She became pregnant and gave birth to a child. But the infant was born with scales, eyes, and horns of a dragon, so they wrapped it up and cast it into the river. The child was found and adopted by an elderly swordsmith and became his apprentice. The smith's daughter also grew fond of the boy. Some time later, the old swordsmith passed away. The dragon child carried on his master's work at the forge. His skill grew steadily until his reputation spread far and wide. He and the girl became a family and welcomed a new member. He was overjoyed to see that the baby bore none of the dragon's features. His fame reached the ears of the reigning shogun, Hashikage Yoshiki, who commanded him to forge a sword without equal. Once the sword was completed, they wanted him to present it to the shogun in person. Though his appearance made such an audience extremely dangerous, he could not defy the order. At first, the shogun was greatly pleased with the sword, but the moment he laid eyes on the smith's face, he flew into a rage and ordered his entire family executed. Despite his desperate pleas, his wife and child were dragged out and put to death. They tried to kill him as well, but no blade could pierce his skin. In the end, they exiled him to the open sea. He himself began to doubt whether his very existence was a mistake. Harrying the fury of a dragon, he forged 2 swords. He used the weaker of the 2 to take his own life. His anguish seemed to flow into the blade, and the sword claimed the shogun's head to avenge his family. Afterward, both swords vanished. Ichijo wept when he heard this story, though he quickly returned to his usual cold composure. Beyond this tale, there were countless others of children who had suffered because of cursed swords. Ammon felt that Ichijo was much like Guy, also pursued by darkness. But Ichijo refused to reveal his identity. When Sayaka and Guy returned, they found Ichijo waiting for them. By now his killing intent had faded. He simply wanted to bring Guy to Shashidai, for that was the world where Guy truly belonged. Ammon let Guy make his own decision, though he believed it would be better if the boy went with Ichijo. Kaitsu agreed. They wanted Guy to be in an environment that suited him, and they were eager to see what he would become. Guy agreed to go with Ichijo. Sayaka could not bear to let him leave and ran after them as far as she could. Inside the mansion of Shin Matoba, the second sword Shiryu began to moan. Before returning to Shashidai, Ichijo drove Guy to his own home to reunite with his wife after 16 years apart. Kei had aged, while Ichijo looked exactly the same as before. The garden was filled with roses, symbols of rejuvenation, much like Kei's own wish to stay by Ichijo's side for just a little longer. Despite all the years of separation, Kei had never been with anyone else or considered remarrying, because to her, Ichijo had always been right here and had never truly left. Guy began to feel confused. Ichijo took him for a walk through the rose garden to explain everything, from the fate of becoming a Busoma to the hibernation at Shashidai. During hibernation, they would cease all activity and be placed in storage. They would only be awakened when needed. Naturally, Ichijo could not see Kei while he slept. They had met in high school, when Kei was only a year younger than him. But after becoming a chrysalis, Ichijo was placed into hibernation, and his body stopped aging. Shashidai had a rule forbidding members from disclosing any information to outsiders, so Kei knew nothing about Ichijo's situation. Yet she never questioned it, choosing instead to stay and wait for him. After finishing his explanation, Ichijo shooed Guy away so he and Kei could have some time alone. The boy wandered the streets by himself until a poster bearing the words Sword Soul caught his eye. The atmosphere inside was electric. On stage, 2 finalists were locked in competition. When Guy realized it was merely a video game tournament, he wanted to leave, but the crowd was so dense he could not get out. On stage, Midoriko was brimming with excitement. She swiftly defeated her opponent and treated the audience below to a song. Back at the house, Ichijo and Kei put on the song from their school dance that year and waltzed together. Back then, Ichijo had knocked out Kei's dance partner in a fit of jealousy, only to discover afterward that the man was her relative. It was that little misunderstanding that had brought them together. Ichijo felt a pang of sorrow looking at Kei now. He helped paint her toenails, and they reminisced about the old days. Kei still had so many places she wanted to visit with Ichijo, and she longed to return to the lake where they had made their fondest memories. When Ichijo told her he would take her there, Kei happily rushed off to get ready. Just then, a call came in from her caretaker, informing Ichijo that Kei's health had deteriorated severely. Ichijo went up to Kei's room. She looked at him with sparkling eyes. She thought he might be nothing more than an illusion, but as long as he was beside her, she did not care. Midoriko returned to the green room. In stark contrast to her cute and friendly persona on stage, she was now insufferably arrogant toward everyone around her. Midoriko ran into her opponent again in the restroom. Since he would not get another chance to see her after the match, he had been hiding there just to say thank you. A year ago, he had been on the verge of taking his own life. He had been falsely accused at work and forced to resign. But Midoriko's smile had saved him. It gave him the strength to stay optimistic and search for a new job. In his eyes, Midoriko was an angel. Faced with his heartfelt words, Midoriko reacted with nothing but disgust and hurled insults at him. Her cruelty left him devastated. Later, Midoriko attended an interview. When it ended, she bumped into her opponent once more. Thinking something had happened to her, he insisted on helping. Without a word, Midoriko grabbed her handbag and beat him with it mercilessly, as though venting all her stress and frustration. After enduring it for so long, he finally snapped and struck Midoriko back without mercy. The fire sword Flamberge, gravely wounded after its defeat by Zolchuan, was desperately seeking a new host when it spotted Midoriko being attacked. It flew toward her and seized the moment to urge her to take hold of it. Midoriko grasped Flamberge and sent the man to his end. Kei was overjoyed when Ichijo brought her to the lakeside. For a brief moment, she felt as though she had returned to her youth. But the joy was short-lived. When Kei caught sight of her own reflection in the water, a sudden wave of pain washed over her. Ichijo wanted to take her to the hospital, but she begged him to bring her home instead. Under Flamberge's control, Midoriko gleefully tore through an entire city block. Guy tried to rush in and stop her, but was burned by the flames from the sword. Only then did Shiryu take command of Guy and launch an attack on Midoriko. Shashidai detected Flamberge's appearance, but could not reach Ichijo, which left them deeply anxious. By this time, Ichijo had brought Kei home. At her request, he opened the wooden wardrobe in her room. Inside hung a beautiful wedding dress. Kay had prepared it long ago, waiting for Ikijo to propose. Ikijo immediately dropped to his knees before her, apologized for taking so long, and asked for her hand. After all those years of waiting, Kay finally got to wear the wedding dress she had kept ready. But by now, her life was nearing its end. Although Kay could never understand why Ikijo would vanish for such long stretches of time without aging a single day, she had never once regretted falling in love with him. Ikijo placed a kiss upon her lips, and Kay passed away peacefully, wrapped in happiness. Only after spending those final moments with the woman he loved did Ikijo contact Shashidai to resume the fight. Outside, Midoriko and Guy were still locked in a fierce battle, and it seemed Guy was losing. Just as Midoriko was about to deliver the finishing blow, Ikijo struck her back. Together, they returned to headquarters. Both were silent the entire way, each carrying a private grief they were unwilling to speak aloud. Yasuko was lounging comfortably on her yacht, soaking up the sun, when she noticed her glass of water was missing a gold leaf and flew into a rage at Billy. Billy offered to prepare a fresh drink, but Yasuko asked him to apply sunscreen on her instead. They were on an expedition to find the treasure of the pirate Throla. Before long, a diver surfaced to report that treasure had been found on the seabed. Together, they hauled a wooden crate onto the deck. But when they pried it open, all they found inside was champagne. Yasuko lost her temper and screamed, furious that she had spent a fortune hiring a renowned team of treasure hunters only to get such a disappointing result. At a hair salon, the master stylist Issei could tell just by touching a client's hair that her life was in disarray. While cutting, he scolded her relentlessly for the terrible damage she had done to her hair. Yet the client was not the least bit angry and even asked him to keep going. By the end, she walked out with a hairstyle she absolutely loved. That evening, the crew gathered on the ship to eat, drink, and share their dreams of what they would do once the treasure was found. Only the professor had no interest in money. All he wanted was to lay eyes on the hammer gallon. It was a legendary weapon once wielded by the pirate Throla, and its existence dated back to ancient Greece. In those times, tournaments were held twice a year under the king's watch. The victor would be rewarded with great honor and fortune. Many knights risked their lives to compete. As time went on, a rumor began to circulate among the knights. The tournament champion always carried one of Galen's swords. Galen was a blacksmith from a small village who had forged many celebrated blades. One day, a knight came to see Galen. He had won the tournament using a Galen sword, and naturally, Galen expected his share of the reward. Instead, the knight wanted no one else to ever wield Galen's weapons again, so he put the smith to death. Galen's son cradled his father's body and wept for 3 days and 3 nights. Then the boy heard his father's hammer calling out to him. The son obeyed the hammer's call, took it in his hands, and entered the tournament. He fought the very knight who had murdered his father. He won by shattering every last one of his opponent's swords. But the king, fearful of the hammer's tremendous power, poisoned the boy at the victory banquet. The hammer was tainted by the poison from that day forward. It fell into the king's possession, but the royal family was soon wiped out. Some theorized that the hammer had poisoned the king's mind, driving him insane until he slaughtered his own household. Everyone found this a terrifying tale. Only Yasuko dismissed the hammer as scrap metal. Her sole ambition was to find gold and silver so she could live an easy, indulgent life. Yasuko had been married 5 times, and every one of her husbands had died. The fortune she had inherited was nearly gone, so she had staked everything on this treasure hunt. Beyond his fame as a hairstylist, Issei also worked as a photographer for a magazine. Thanks to Issei, their previous month's issue had become a hit, doubling their sales. The reason Issei had chosen hairstyling as his profession was that he was searching for the most beautiful hair in the world, and when he found the person who possessed it, Issei would kill her with his own hands. Years ago, his entire family had been murdered by a woman with stunningly beautiful hair, and he had never forgotten it. The next day, Dick located the treasure. Chest after chest of gold, silver, and jewels was hauled aboard. But the hammer gallon that the professor had mentioned was nowhere to be found. He was certain it had to be somewhere in these waters. Yasuko stood up to go find Dick, only to discover that he was already dead. That day, Arnie's visited Issei's salon for a styling session. The instant Issei touched her hair, he knew. This was the woman who had slaughtered his family. Hatred surged within him like a tidal wave, and he wanted nothing more than to kill her on the spot. But outwardly, he kept smiling as though nothing were wrong. Issei continued his work. Meanwhile, Arnie's told him that he would soon receive a legendary sword called Nebastigma. It was a blade that harbored a snow spirit. Its origins stretched far into the distant past, when 2 young men from the countryside fell in love with a beautiful snow spirit. The 2 fought each other for her affection. The loser reached out to the snow spirit and whispered his dying words. He wished that in death, she would hold him in her arms. To fulfill his wish, the spirit set foot upon the earth for the very first time. But at that moment, he snapped one of his own ribs and drove it through her chest. He would rather kill her than let anyone else have her. The balm that took the snow spirit's life became the bloodthirsty demon sword Nebastigma. By the time Arnie's finished her story, Issei had also finished styling her hair. Dick's death threw everyone on the ship into chaos. They began to suspect one another. When they noticed the professor was missing, they split up to search for him. By the time Yasuko arrived, 2 more people had been killed. The professor appeared from behind and seized her by the throat. He wanted to keep the treasure all to himself. Billy crept up from behind and stabbed the professor with a fatal blow. Yasuko thought she had been saved, but Billy intended to kill her too so he could claim the treasure alone. After a desperate struggle, Yasuko fell overboard into the sea. In that moment, the will to survive blazed within her. The hammer gallon appeared and offered itself to her, promising immense power if she would take it. After leaving the salon, Issei secretly followed Arnie's into a narrow alley. He demanded to know why she had killed Sandy, his younger sister. But Arnie's killed without reason. She had been born a weapon. Issei pulled out a gun he had prepared and fired straight at Arnie's, but her wounds healed almost instantly. Arnie's told Issei that her body housed 2 weapons, and she would give him one. Issei staggered back in terror, emptying his gun at her, but none of the shots inflicted any damage. She drew the demon sword Nebastigma and let it merge into Issei's body. With no captain left aboard, Yasuko's ship drifted aimlessly across the sea. Billy was lucky enough to spot another vessel passing by and set off a smoke signal to call for rescue. At that very moment, Yasuko launched herself out of the water and onto the deck, the hammer gallon gripped in her hand. Billy could not hide his terror. Issei returned to the salon and resumed his work, only to find that his hand was trembling beyond his control. His next client was none other than Yasuko. Long ago, in a village near the Mediterranean Sea, there lived a young man named Kanata. He was the son of a human father and a fairy mother, which blessed him with knowledge and strength beyond that of ordinary mortals. When Kanata turned 18, his mother bestowed upon him the halberd, an ancient weapon of the fairy realm. When wielded for justice, it would grant its user immense power. But if used for evil, the wielder would suffer a terrible calamity. Kanata went to the battlefield and used the halberd in the name of justice. To protect his village, he single-handedly defeated hundreds of enemies and was hailed as a hero. But when he returned home, Kanata discovered that his beloved Sarah had married a young doctor in his absence. Consumed by the betrayal, he flew into a jealous rage, hunted the couple down, and killed them both with the halberd. From that moment, the halberd turned a deep crimson and began attacking innocent people. Under the weapon's control, Kanata slaughtered the villagers and even murdered his own parents. In the end, Kanata died of exhaustion, but the halberd continued its massacre. After recounting the tale of the halberd, Kayoko ordered Marcus and Mickey to retrieve the weapon for the organization. Their target this time was the Sekiya real estate conglomerate. Shashidai had just received intelligence that the CEO, Sekiya Shuntaro, had acquired the halberd. Since he was currently ill and in need of a secretary to look after him, Agent Huriya Mina had infiltrated the company under the guise of his personal secretary. On Ikijo's side, since it had been so long since he was last out in the world, he continued to savor every moment. Once he entered the hibernation pod, there was no telling when he would wake again. Ikijo advised Guy that if he had any plans, he should act on them now. He told Guy to look around, because this scenery might be completely different by the time he returned. Chrysalis hosts had to hibernate constantly and could not enjoy life the way everyone else did. So all they could do was commit what they saw in this moment to memory. That was how they proved their existence in this world, that they were real and not merely illusions. Ikijo asked Guy what it was that he had been searching for in this life. Back at the conglomerate, the moment Mickey saw Mina again, he could not hold back and pulled her into a passionate kiss. Thanks to Mina, they learned there was an executive floor beneath the basement. The halberd was being kept in a safe down there. The ventilation ducts leading to it connected to the men's restroom in the basement. Mina had arranged an elevator keycard, a floor map, and the safe's password there for Mickey. Before leaving, she reminded him to be careful because security in the building was extremely tight. Using the keycard, they took the elevator down to the basement level. Marcus's sword Azoth carried the devil's seal of Paracelsus. He used its power to cloak them both in darkness, rendering them invisible to the security cameras. They reached the safe without incident, but inside the safe was yet another safe, and Mina did not have the password for this one. Marcus leaned in to take a closer look and was immediately hit with a retinal scan that triggered an authorization failure alarm. The room began flooding with gas. Marcus slashed at the inner safe with Azoth, but could not break through. All they could do was wait for Mina to find the password. While Mina was searching for the code, Sekiya arrived. She pretended to be checking his medication, but he saw right through her. Only then did Mina realize that Sekiya had known about her plan all along and the halberd was never in the safe. She quickly relayed the news to Mickey. Sekiya drew the halberd to punish the traitor Mina. His guards also rushed to the safe room, but Mickey and Marcus were already gone. The two raced to Mina's location to rescue her. Mickey took a heavy blow meant for Mina and was seriously wounded. Marcus seized the moment while Sekiya was focused on Mickey and struck him down from behind. With its host dead, the halberd immediately latched onto Mickey, sending him into agonizing pain. Because a death had occurred, they had to flee before the police arrived. Mickey's wounds healed quickly, and they successfully recovered the halberd. But Mickey was in no hurry to return to Shashidai. He wanted to enjoy what time he had outside with Mina. Once they went back, neither of them knew when they might see each other again. Marcus understood, so he quietly left them alone. Mina was still worried about Mickey's condition, as his body now housed 2 swords. But Mickey remained confident in his own strength. In truth, both swords inside him were constantly urging him to kill. But for now, Mickey could still keep them under control. Mickey took Mina to a park, and they spent the entire day having the time of their lives. It was their very first outing together beyond the walls of the base. While they were kissing, the voices in Mickey's head surged back. He felt himself losing control and told Mina to run. Kyoka, seeing the situation spiraling, contacted Ikijo to handle it. Mickey did not want to hurt Mina, so he used the last shred of his reason to flee. But Mina ran after him out of concern. By then, Mickey had completely lost control and attacked Mina. Marcus tried to hold him back. Ikijo arrived as well and used the chakram to draw Mickey's attention toward himself. After engaging Mickey, Ikijo realized he had not yet fully transformed into a Bisoma. But the situation was dire nonetheless. Shiryu trembled without ceasing, desperate to join the fight. Mickey shattered Ikijo's chakram ring. Guy had no choice but to enter the battle. In a critical moment, Ikijo used his own body to shield Guy from a blow. Mina called out Mickey's name in anguish, begging him to wake up and stop. While Mickey's reason wrestled against the 2 swords for control, Guy charged forward and drove his blade into Mickey's shoulder. The pain brought Mickey crashing to the ground, and he reverted to his human form. They rushed him back to base for examination. Though they had managed to prevent Mickey from becoming a Bisoma this time, harboring 2 almacores meant he could transform at any moment, and hibernation would no longer be enough. The best course of action now was to retrieve the weapons from his body as quickly as possible. When she came to, Mina told Mickey that everything would be fine if he continued to hibernate. Her words brought Mickey a measure of joy, but he still felt deeply guilty for nearly hurting her. Before returning to hibernation, Mickey told Mina about a dream he had. He dreamed of living an ordinary life with 2 children, a boy and a girl. He would buy a cozy little house and get a dog. Sometimes he would come home drunk and face the adorable wrath of his wife. Mickey gathered every ounce of courage he had and proposed to Mina. As Marcus's pod descended into sleep, a cloud of red smoke erupted inside Mickey's pod, corroding his body. Mina watched everything unfold from behind the screen, yet not a trace of grief crossed her face. That night, inside his mansion, Shin heard Shiryu crying once more. Its weeping grew louder and louder. Shin had heard before that Shiryu had a weaker counterpart, so he assumed it was mourning and searching for its kindred. While having breakfast the next morning, a visitor came to discuss building an orphanage with Shin. The man had found a large building up for sale. It had once been an elementary school and was now abandoned. It was a beautiful and spacious place surrounded by nature, and the visitor believed it would be perfect for an orphanage. Shin thought the idea was wonderful and agreed to invest. Later, another person came to Shin proposing a nursing home, but the site they wanted was the same location the first visitor had chosen for the orphanage. That evening, Sayaka stood staring at the spot where Shiryu had once been kept, thinking of Guy. They had been together since childhood, and his sudden departure was something she still could not come to terms with. Ammon told Sayaka she should try to understand, because Guy was being guided by the fate Shiryu had set for him. Guy was trying to live as a sword, and Ammon had helped him along that path. But Sayaka could not comprehend how a normal person could possibly live as a sword. She ran out of the room in tears. Ammon stood alone in silence. A sword's fate from the moment of its birth was to kill. But with a scabbard, it could choose its own destiny. Guy was now a sword without a scabbard, and his humanity was that scabbard. He could still choose his own path. Ammon wanted very much to see what destiny the boy would choose. Sayaka stepped outside and looked up at the moon. She believed she was the only person who truly understood who Guy really was. Yet even she felt uncertain whether Guy was still himself, still the boy who had once saved her when they were small. Her mind drifted back to that time. On the day Guy ran away, Sayaka chased after him and came face to face with a wild wolf. Guy turned back without hesitation and stood in front of her, shielding her even as the wolf sank its teeth into his arm until it bled. Afterward, they walked home together. Sayaka knew that at this very moment, Guy was also looking up at the same moon. And indeed, Guy sat alone, gazing at the moonlight. Ikijo came over to talk with him. He explained to Guy that having nothing to protect and no one to love meant he could not even protect himself. And that was why he was weak. The next day, Shin went to inspect the proposed site in person. But the 2 project proposers could not stop arguing over what the place should become. Shin looked around for a while, then an idea struck him: combine the orphanage and the nursing home into one. That way, the elderly could look after the children as if they were their own grandchildren. Everyone thought the idea was brilliant and agreed to work together. After Guy left, Sayaka remained distracted and unhappy at school. Her friends invited her to a newly opened pastry shop to lift her spirits. Sayaka cheerfully agreed. At the shrine, Kaichitsu met with Kazuma, a member of the Gabai organization. Kazuma had come to apologize for the trouble Soin had caused. Kaichitsu held no grudge and had even given Soin a proper burial. The incident made Gabai realize they still had much to learn. The Busoma that had fought Guy had also vanished after their encounter. Since both Shashidai and Gabai shared the goal of destroying Busoma, Kaijitsu suggested the two sides cooperate. What set them apart was that Gabai fought without weapons, relying solely on their bodies as granted by the gods. But not everyone could be like Himiko, so they still had to train themselves every day. The Gabai organization believed that weapons were created for killing, and those who wielded them were equally detestable. Guy cooked a simple meal and stayed at the construction site with Akijo. He wanted to know why Akijo disliked returning to Shashidai yet remained a member. The answer was simple. To survive, Chrysalis hosts would inevitably become Busoma. Hibernation at Shashidai could delay that fate. Hikijo was terrified of becoming a Busoma because it meant losing himself entirely. But Guy did not understand why one had to cling so desperately to the self. So Ikijo told him a story from long ago. Back then, Ikijo was a soldier fighting alongside his comrades. A grenade was hurled toward them without warning, killing most of them. Ikijo was gravely wounded as well. Before losing consciousness, he saw the enemy charging toward them. That was when the chakram appeared and granted him its power. His wounds healed, and Ikijo rose to his feet and eliminated every last enemy single-handedly. But when he turned back, ready to kill his own comrades as well, a photograph of him and Kei slipped from his pocket. The sight of it reminded him of the woman he loved and brought him back to his senses. Ikijo told Guy not to let the weapon use him, but to wield it for the person he loved, the person he wanted to protect. Without that, he would always be fragile. Sayaka went to the pastry shop with her friends, but still could not find any joy. After saying goodbye to them, she ran into Shin. He was helping collect signatures for a petition. Izumi Park was in danger of being demolished to make way for an apartment complex, but it was a lush green space beloved by the local residents. Shin refused to let such a beautiful oasis be lost and had stepped in to help. Sayaka happily signed her name. Shortly after, a group of thugs blocked her path. Shin stepped forward to reason with them, but was beaten to a pulp. When he came to, Sayaka was by his side. After leaving, the thugs turned their attention to Midoriko. That was their greatest mistake, for they would never see another sunrise. Midoriko walked over to where Sayaka and Shin were, pretending she remembered nothing, and moved to attack them. Fortunately, Guy arrived just in time to block her. Shin recognized what was on Guy's arm. It was Shiryu. While searching for Guy, Hikijo came across Zolchuan, but it had no intention of fighting and swiftly departed. A sudden pain surged through Ikijo. It seemed the chakram within him was beginning to change. After a brief duel with Guy, Midoriko realized she was no match for him and fled. Sayaka saw that Guy was wounded and wanted to take him home. But Guy refused because he no longer had a home to return to. He coldly told Sayaka to step aside and leave him alone. All Sayaka could do was watch his retreating silhouette through her tears. The next day, Sayaka's class welcomed a new transfer student. To her surprise, it was Shin. After Mickey's death, Shashidai altered Mina's appearance and implanted memories of Marcus so she could pose as his former girlfriend. She now went by Takagi Aya, tasked with monitoring Marcus. Marcus was then awakened for a routine examination. Shashidai used this as an opportunity for Marcus to meet Aya. The moment Marcus laid eyes on her, she reminded him of Erika. Aya introduced herself as Marcus's counselor and explained that she would be responsible for overseeing him from now on. Being around Aya made Marcus a little shy. She began with a few simple questions to break the ice. She even lied to Marcus, telling him Mickey was still in hibernation to put his mind at ease. Marcus trusted her and opened his heart. Even now, he could not believe that a weapon could change a person in such a terrifying way. Marcus felt a deep fear when he thought about the possibility of becoming a Busoma himself one day. Aya stayed close, showing understanding and offering comfort. But Marcus was still afraid he would turn into a monster. Aya pulled him into her arms to soothe the anxiety in his heart. The gesture was identical to what Erika had done after Marcus's accident. It made Marcus mistake Aya for Erika once again. And that, of course, was exactly what she intended. On the road back to Shashidai, Ikijo told Guy many things. Chrysalis hosts were no different from patients suffering a terminal illness. No medicine could stop it. What awaited them at the end was not just death, but being consumed by the weapon's instincts and losing themselves entirely. Across the world, countless weapons known as Sage Alma were manipulating humans. Guy's Shiryu possessed the rare ability to crystallize. Shashidai existed to gather and preserve Sage Alma from around the globe. It was a facility where Chrysalis hosts could live in isolation and be studied before their weapons took full control. They came here to enter hibernation. Meanwhile, Shashidai would continue its research for a cure. The hibernation would last until that cure was perfected. At school, Shin attracted attention from his classmates for his ability to speak multiple languages, but that same quality made him a target for the school bullies. Though she was frightened, Sayaka stepped forward and shouted for a teacher, drawing a crowd of students around them. This scared the bullies into retreating. Afterward, Sayaka and Shin talked together. When Shin asked about the person who had saved them the other day, Sayaka told him it was someone she considered a younger brother, a boy named Guy. Back at headquarters, Kyoka was furious with Ikijo when he and Guy returned. After finishing his mission, he had refused to come back and had ignored all her messages. After welcoming Guy, Kyoka ordered Ikijo to return to his hibernation pod immediately. But this time he did not want to go back. Ikijo also made a discovery. Kyoka was the daughter of Miura, someone he had met once as a child. Ikijo wanted to deal with Miura personally, as the two had once worked together. At the very least, it would allow him to repay a debt he owed Miura. Ikijo knew Kyoka also wanted to save her father's soul. Ikijo requested permission to fight Zolchuan, but Kyoka did not have the authority to grant it. On her way to meet the higher-ups, Kyoka recalled the day she lost her mother. She knew she did not want to lose the only family she had left. Kyoka met with the leadership and raised the issue Ikijo had brought up, but they deemed it unnecessary. It had been over a decade since Miura became Zolchuan, and many Chrysalis hosts had fallen to him. Though it had not yet been announced, the organization had completed development of an anti-Busoma weapon and intended to use it on Zolchuan. They refused to use Prismephin, the treatment that could revert a Busama back into a human, on Miura because he had tarnished Shoshidai's legacy. Kyoka had no choice but to comply. Ikijo took Guy to the Alma storage vault. He knew that if he insisted on confronting Zolchuan, he might become a Busama himself. But only a Chrysalis could defeat a Busama. To wield the weapon's power and win a battle, one had to synchronize with the Alma core inside their body. The longer one synchronized, the faster they would become a Busoma. These cursed weapons craved blood and war. They stripped the host's body of its human heart. After leaving the vault, they ran into Marcus and Aya. Marcus was brimming with faith that Shoshidai would help them become normal people again. After school that day, Sayaka went to a club with her friends since there was no longer anyone waiting for her at home. Seeing this, Shin signed up for the same club Sayaka had joined. While everyone else was sketching a vase as their subject, Shin drew Sayaka instead. Zolchuan continued its endless cycle of slaughter. Heavy infantry was deployed to engage it, but was annihilated in the blink of an eye. Newly developed mechanized armor units were then sent into battle. They did manage to hold Zolchuan at bay. Kyoka's mind drifted back to her childhood, to the image of her gentle father teaching her to play the piano. Kyoka had once heard Miura speak about Ikijo. He said Ikijo was lazy but dependable, and so Kyoka entrusted her father's fate to him. Ikijo then took Guy along with him. Kyoka watched Miura's image on the screen and remembered the last time he had said goodbye before leaving for a mission. She had been so uneasy that she ran after him and threw her arms around him, begging him to promise he would come back. But Miura had simply smiled, patted her head, and stepped into the car. And after that, Miura became what he was now. Though the mechanized units were powerful, they could not hold Zolchuan for long. Now it would be a showdown between two old friends. Ikijo recalled the drink they had once shared and promised Miura they would raise their glasses together again in the afterlife. Ikijo knew his time was running short, so before heading to face Zolchuan, he made Guy promise that if he turned into a Busoma, Guy would be the one to defeat him. Guy gave his word. Ikijo wanted Guy to recognize his own weakness when that moment came. Facing Miura, Ikijo asked what had frightened him so deeply that he sought such power. Zolchuan struck first. Ikijo gave everything he had to free Miura. Long ago, they had once told each other that if the day came when Miura lost himself, Ikijo would punch him as hard as he could. Neither of them imagined those words would one day come true. Kyoka watched the battle from behind her screen, silently praying for Ikijo to save her father. After leaving the club, Shin followed Sayaka to give her the portrait he had drawn. Sayaka did not refuse the gift from her new friend. Shin's butler arrived to pick him up shortly after. Zolchuan's assault did not let up. One by one, Ikijo's rings of light were shattered. By a stroke of luck, one managed to bind Zolchuan. Just as Ikijo prepared to deliver the finishing blow, a wave of pain brought him to his knees. Zolchuan broke free and counterattacked, wounding Ikijo. Zolchuan demanded that Ikijo shed his chrysalis shell and fight at full power, but he refused. Guy leaped into the fray to buy Ikijo time to recover. From high above, Rins watched the battle with satisfaction. Ikijo was waiting for the perfect opening to land a fatal strike. When the moment came, he unleashed a barrage of light rings. While Zolchuan was occupied destroying them, Guy surged forward and wounded it. Hope of victory began to flicker. Ikijo hurled an enormous ring of light towards Zolchuan. Guy charged in at the same time. It seemed as though this battle was about to reach its conclusion, but Grims intercepted Guy's attack. Zolchuan immediately dropped to one knee in deference. Grimms' arrival filled Kyoka with dread. Zolchuan withdrew, leaving Guy and Ikijo to face Grims alone. Guy could feel that Grimms' killing intent existed on an entirely different level from the Busama they had fought before. Kazuma returned to Gabai's base to find Himiko. He went to the waterfall and reported Soin's death. Himiko felt she was still far too weak. She could also sense the violent energy of a distant battle erupting far away. Himiko cleansed herself beneath the waterfall so that no demonic taint could corrupt her. She reminded Kazuma that he too needed to focus more. When Sayaka returned home, she opened the portrait Shin had given her. She realized the girl in the painting looked deeply sad. Ever since Guy had left, she had always looked like this. She gazed at a photograph they had taken together and wondered when they would see each other again. Ikijo recognized the figure before him as Grimms, the god of death. This was also the first time Ikijo had ever come face to face with him. Kyoka ordered Ikijo to retreat, knowing how dangerous Grimm's was. Though Akijo wanted to comply, he no longer had the strength to escape. He wanted to fight alone so Guy could get away, but there was no way Guy would agree to that. Even after witnessing Grimm's power firsthand, Guy was still ready to fight. Grimm's told Guy that the age of humanity would soon come to an end and the age of Busoma would dawn. They would shatter their human shells and become the architects of a new world. And now was the time for Busoma to be reborn. Guy could not stand to hear another word and charged into battle. Akijo could not simply stand by and watch Guy fight alone. After school, Shin attended a gala celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Matoba Group's charitable foundation. In her room, Sayaka looked at their photograph and remembered all the hurtful things Guy had said. She could not understand why he had spoken that way, yet she never stopped hoping he would come back. Shin took the stage on behalf of the Matoba Group. This speech was about violence. The history of humankind was steeped in it. Even in the modern era, war and terrorism lurked at every corner. This was a problem that concerned everyone. Shin called upon the audience to renounce violence, to cast aside their weapons, and to make peace a reality. Meanwhile, Guy and Akijo were still fighting with everything they had. Akijo was spent. Grimm's dealt him a devastating blow. Guy was pushed so far to the brink that he began transforming into a Busoma to fight Grimm's. Akijo tried to stop him, but no longer had the strength. Grimm's would not let this battle end until both Guy and Akijo had become Busoma. No matter how many times Grimm's struck him down, Guy rose again. Shiryu's temptation was growing stronger than ever. Sayaka had fallen asleep, and when she woke, she found their framed photograph shattered on the floor. A sense of dread washed over her that something terrible had happened to Guy. Akijo used his rings of light to restrain Guy, but it was no use. Guy broke free and drove his blade straight through Akijo. Akijo's death brought Guy back to his original state, but Akijo himself had been fully consumed and had become a Busoma.